Hi, this is Karin from the Huntley Library. Today we're going to be making pet portraits, so we're going to grab some supplies and get started.
Alright, here are the supplies that you're going to need today. You're going to need some kind of reference photo or printout of your pet or the animal that you're going to be drawing and painting. So I have a couple of here to choose from. You can just print these out on a printer or copy a photo in a copy machine. It doesn't have to be in color. It could be just black and white. You can paint in color, or you can paint in black and white, or you can draw in color or black and white. It is up to you. You'll need a pencil for part of this process, and also a couple of paintbrushes if you're going to paint, some water to clean your brushes, maybe a paper towel or some kind of napkin to get the moisture off of your brushes in between different colors that you're using. This is optional, but you could have a palette like this to mix your paints in, or you can use a plate. If you're using watercolor like I'm going to be using, you might want to use something that's more plastic and not too absorbent, otherwise you're just going to lose your paint in that on that surface. So don't recommend a paper plate if you're doing it on a plate. Okay, you're going to need some kind of paper. If you're doing watercolor, I recommend watercolor paper, so I have a couple of different varieties here. This is a card that I'm actually going to cut into two, and this is half a sheet of watercolor paper, which I got from this pad here. So you could use either of those. You could also paint on cardboard. I have a piece of cardboard that I'm going to use to protect my table, but if you wanted to paint directly onto cardboard, you could do that too. That makes kind of a nice stiff sturdy background for your artwork. If you have something like a watercolor canvas, you could use that, and depending on what kind of paint you use, like if you're using acrylic, a canvas would probably work fine for acrylic paint too. Not so much for watercolor unless it's a special watercolor paper canvas. And I think we are ready to get started now that we've talked about supplies. So you just have to pick out probably out of all of the fantastic photos that you have, something of your pet or the animal that you're going to do to work with. So I'll let you do that. So I'm going to work with this picture of my friend's German Shepherd. This is Sloan, and she is a little bit over a year old now. And the first thing that I'm going to do is show you a transfer technique that you can use to get this picture onto your piece of watercolor paper or whatever you are going to be painting or drawing on. So this part's super easy. You'll all be able to do it. You're just going to flip this picture over, and this is where you want to have a printout rather than an actual photo to use, even if you use your photo as a reference later on. And you're just going to take your pencil and start just kind of shading this in wherever it is that you're going to want to trace over to get that image to show up on your other piece of paper. And you can make this, it doesn't have to be super, super dark, but you do want to have enough of the graphite material on here so that when you flip it over and trace on the other side, it will leave a nice tracing of it on your artwork. So that looks pretty good to me. If you find out later on that it's too late, you can go back and do this again. Okay, and now I need my watercolor paper. So since this is pretty small, it's gonna probably fit on just one half of this. So I can make this a postcard, or it can just be a very small painting. So I will just cut it in half. And now I can have two pieces of art if I want to. Okay. And then you're going to take your graphite covered photo printout and just put it right on top of what you're going to be tracing onto. You're going to need your pencil for this part too. And you're going to trace anything that you want to show up in your painting. So I'm going to go around the ears here. And it doesn't have to be perfect, you just want a good outline of what you're going to be painting or drawing. And if you don't want what's in the background of the photo, you don't have to trace that. You can make some other background for it. So I've got Sloane's ears, and I'm going to outline some of the shapes where these other colors come in too, just so I can see them easily on my tracing and know where I need to change my colors of paint. Here's her little eyebrows. They're kind of circular. This is where her nose is. Kind of a shiny spot from the light on her nose. And this part is harder to see where her face is. I actually can't see her other eye in this photo here. Here's one of them. Here's some lines on her face. You can see some of the light catching it. So that might be something that you'll focus on when you're doing the actual painting. And you do need to press relatively firmly when you're doing this so that you get a good transfer. You can go back after we finish doing this initial transfer. You can work on the transferred drawing and add more of the detail in pencil if you want to, or you can add it later when you're doing the painting. Try and get the light parts of her paws there. And if you want to, like, I think I might want to include this shadow area, although I might make the background another color. So I'm just going to add some lines to indicate where that is. And if you want to have a border like you can see in the photo here, you could add a border too. Maybe try and make it straighter than I did there. Since we're using pencil, if you are not happy with how any of this is turning out, you can erase it, or you can start again with another piece of paper. I just need to take a closer look at this and see if I can figure out where her other eye is. Can you see it? I think it's missing. Maybe right in here. I just kind of want to have a general sense of where that is so she doesn't look too lopsided. Okay, so this is what my transfer looks like. You can see it's a little bit loosey-goosey. That's okay. It gives me an idea of where things need to go in my painting now that I'm going to get to that. There's one that I did earlier that I can show you too. This is my rabbit, Tiny Bun, and then I had put some of the pencil graphite on the back here and traced around her shape and some of the shapes in the carpet that she's laying on. And then this was my tracing after I did that. So it is kind of impressionistic, but it will give me a good idea about where to put down the colors and the detail when I get to that part. Okay, so I just want to clean up a few of these lines here. I'm not got a real strong line for her cheek on this side. Here's her mouth over here. She's kind of got some lighter areas on the inside of her ears. Strengthen my border a little bit. Okay. You don't want this part to be too dark. Like, you want to be able to see it right now before you paint, but you don't really want the pencil to show through later on. So especially if you're working with a lighter colored animal or a lighter colored background, then don't make the pencil too dark. You can erase it a little bit before you paint that part. Or if you really want the outline to stand out, you could even use a marker or a dark paint color to emphasize it. So that is up to you. I'm going to be using watercolor pencils today, which I really like because they're very versatile. You can use them like a colored pencil and just color in different areas that you want. You have more flexibility. You can blend colors together on the paper before you actually get them wet. You can blend them after they're wet. You can use your colored pencils or your colored watercolor pencils like watercolors and paint directly onto them. I'll show you a little bit about some of these techniques before I paint onto this. Let me get a little piece of scratch paper here. Okay, so here's a sheet of watercolor paper. If you have watercolor pencils and haven't used them or would like some tips on using them, I'm going to show you a few things now. So you can just draw with these like a normal pencil, and if you have a pencil sharpener you can sharpen them too, so that's just drawing with it. And you can take your paintbrush and get it a little wet. I just got it very loosely, just very barely wet, and you can take off some of that. If it's really drippy wet, you can take some of that off by using the rim of your glass or whatever you're using to clean your brush. And then you can mix it like this, like you would do with normal watercolors. You can also take your watercolor pencil and get some more water on your brush and then paint the end of it to pick up some of that color. This can be a little bit messy. You can see that some of the paint is coming off, so be careful if you're using. You don't maybe want to do it right over your painting like I'm doing over this piece of paper. You could do it over a paper towel, or just be careful, or your palette. And then you can, this gives you a little bit more control about how intense the color is going to be. Some of this is really washed out, some of it's pretty dark. So if you haven't used these before and you're trying them out for the first time, it's a good idea to just play with them a little bit to see how they work before you start using them in your actual painting. And if you're using just like the dried watercolor set or something like that, you can also play with that to see how watercolors work if you're not super familiar with it. So that's that. You can also, once this is wet, you can draw with it as a pencil again. And sometimes that makes some interesting artwork. Or you can get it more wet and draw with it directly. And that can add some interesting texture too. Or if you just have water on your paper, we can do that as well. Here's another test. So I just added some more water on to the paper, and you can draw right through that. And if you're not particularly good with a paintbrush, this gives you a little bit more control too if you are better at drawing with a pencil. So those are some fun watercolor things you can do to practice before we actually paint. So in one of my art classes in high school, we were working on watercolors, and our teacher recommended that we start with lighter colors first and then move on to darker colors. Because in watercolor, you can't really erase anything or paint over it with other watercolors that are lighter. So it becomes difficult to correct any mistakes you might have had or might have made while you're painting. Acrylics will work a little bit differently because you can paint over those. In my reference photo here, Sloan has these really light beige eyebrows and markings on her, which they're almost white, so I could technically not paint those. I could just leave them white and we can see what happens with that. I'm going to try and mix a little beige color if possible. So I'm going to get some water in here. My brush is still a little bit gray from before. I don't think it's going to matter too much. And then I've got a kind of tan watercolor pencil that I'm going to get going in here. So that should be wet, and then I can brush some of the color off with my paintbrush. Okay, and that is probably as dark as I want that to be. My watercolor pencil set came with a white watercolor pencil, it looks like. This looks like it's white to me. I don't know how that's going to work, but I will try and add some of the white to my tan mixture here and see if that will help lighten it up a little bit. My other option is to just use it very diluted, the tan, so that it doesn't show up. Or if when I put it on the painting, if it looks like it's too dark, I can quickly dab at it with a dry paper towel or a napkin to take some of that moisture away, and then that will make the color a little bit less intense. You can also add water to it to kind of fade that color. This looks like it might work though. Got kind of a milky beige going on here. And if you've got these watercolor pencils and you got them wet like this, you can put them off to the side to dry somewhere. Hopefully I mixed up enough so I don't need to mess with that too much more. So I'm going to move this out of the frame a little bit, and then we'll work on some of these lighter areas. Okay. So I have a light area down by her jaw here that I outlined. That looks like it's going to be okay. And then up in her ear, over here, and her eyebrows. There's a little bit in here, and you can just lay this on over that whole area. I know there's little hairs, little dark hairs that are coming across there. We might be able to refine what that looks like later on, maybe with a smaller brush, or we can go back over with a marker or something to really add some detail there. And she's got some lighter areas right along her nose here, and maybe on the underside right here. And then on her chest, she's got these markings too. And then on the inside of her legs, her front legs here, she's got some of the lighter coloring. It looks like she's also got some lighter coloring back here as well. It's more in shadow though, so we might make this darker later on. And there's a little bit right here on her eye and right over here. Like I said, we can paint over, like if you make this area too big and you need to darken it later on, you can. That'll be easy enough to do. there's just some lighter areas in here that I'm going to make beige for now and then go over later on. Alright. Did I get everything? I hope. Might be a little bit right there, coming up her leg. Maybe a few lighter patches there. Okay, so I think next I'm going to do kind of a gray color where she has lighter black markings, just to show where the light is hitting her. So, do you have a gray? I'm just going to use a lighter black here, I think. I'll get my palette out of the way. And if you need to let your painting dry a little bit before you work on it some more, you can do that. Like I said, if you have a napkin, you can also blot it like that. Just be careful that you're not blotting with a clean part of it every time, if you don't want that paint to transfer somewhere else on your painting. Blot, blot, blot. Okay. So that's going to be important, especially if you've decided to switch techniques like I am and color with your watercolor pencils rather than paint like the watercolors you normally would use. So that's where her eye is. There's her other eye. And I'm just gonna lightly fill this in. Because we can add more color later on. If you're wondering what that noise is in the background, that is one of my rabbits, Hickory. He's working really hard on one of his construction projects. He's got a cardboard box out here that he's tearing apart. I thought it would be quiet because he'd gone into the other room, but no. He is a very busy bunny. Okay, here's Sloane's nose. There's that little spot of light on it, so I'm going to leave this little spot right here open so that I'm not going to paint anything there. Hopefully I'll remember. And do not despair if your painting looks kind of blobby at this point. It's going to until you add more detail. I'm not going to go right up to the side of her face here because I want this delineation between her cheek and her body to stay. So to do that, I'm just going to leave it colorless at the moment. And you can do that wherever you want to remember that there are lines or okay, that almost looks like a German Shepherd. All right. It just comes down a little bit. Okay, so I'm ready to grab my paintbrush again. And I'm just going to start at the top here so that I'm not dragging my hand over things that I've already painted. recommend doing that. And I'm just going to get it wet a little bit. Start to blend this paint. And I've got kind of a lot of water here, so I don't really want all of that up there. So I'm going to drag it down slowly over other areas that I want to moisten. Do you hate the word moist? I have a lot of friends and coworkers who are not fans of it, which just kind of encourages me to use it all the time. Moist, 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 moist. Anyway, my painting is a little moist in some areas, so I'm just going to move those around so that it's more evenly moist. Damp. Damp is what I would prefer, and not too wet. Okay, again, a little bit too much water over here, but I'm going to move it around so that it's not all in that one spot. If you find you've run out of room to move the water and you've got too much on here like I do right now, you can blot again to help you do that. That might make it lighter too, so you may need to go back and add some more pigment, paint to your creation. I didn't really do her nose yet. This part I'm going to be careful with and I'm not going to add any additional water yet to this part because I really want to preserve that white spot there, and it's more detailed. Here's her nose. Okay, I'll let that dry for a little bit. Okay, so Sloan is a little bit drier now, and I'm going to use this tan color again to do sort of the floor background here, and then her eye, which is pretty nearly the same color as the floor. This part's still a little wet. Okay, so here's her eye. And my colored pencil, since I used it before, is also still a little bit wet. Here's where that shadow is. So I will make use of the more intense color that's coming off of here right now to do the shadowing here. And then there's just a little bit over here as well. And if I want to, I could add the wood grain. I don't know. Maybe you can do that too. Like a little bit lighter here, a little bit lighter here. And then the wood grain is kind of across like that. That's a darker area. And there's some lighter areas right in here on the photo. So I might add a little bit of yellow to to that area. Hopefully that won't stand out too much. And then there's a little light area right down in the front here. So I'll add a little yellow there, and then like right under her paw, just here, is a little light spot too. So I might put a little bit of yellow there as well. And this area is a little lighter. Okay. I don't think, well, I can extend the floor up that way too. So I can just do a, looks like there's a shine on the floor too. Up here it's a little bit whiter. So maybe I'll put in some of that beige that I made before up in that area, and then I can just put in a little bit of this here and just a tiny bit here. And then I'll paint the rest in with the palette when I get to that part. Okay. Moving things around a little bit. I'll bring my palette down here. And we'll put some more of that beige in up here. It's also going to get this paint that I've drawn on here wet as well. And this mark, you'll remember, was one that I made just to indicate where the shadow was along Sloane's shoulder here. So I'm not real worried about that staying in here permanently. I'm going to put some more of the beige in up here. And then that is mixing pretty well with the other color, the tan. Okay. And then come down over here on the side of her leg. That's a little bit more yellow than I want it to be. So I'll bring that up here. Maybe blot it a little bit. And then down here where it's a little darker, I'm just using the brush to kind of push the paint up against the outline of Sloane's outline here. So I don't want it to cross any of those lines. So if you find that you have a lot of paint or a lot of moisture here, blot it off, pull it away like that, and you can always push gently into those areas with your brush when it's a little bit less sloppy. Okay, now I need a little bit more. And if you want to emphasize, maybe I want more emphasis on the grain of the floor and the horizontal movement here, I can pull it across horizontally rather than painting vertically like I was doing. And then we'll get more of that. Hickory has rejoined us. Thanks, Hickory. He had a little nap while I was waiting for this to dry a little bit, but you can tell he's nice and alert again. Do your pets help you when you're doing other things? My rabbits like to help when I'm cleaning their cages, and I guess they're not really in cages right now, but when I'm cleaning their rabbit areas, they use litter boxes, and they're always interested in what I'm doing with those. please don't take that away. We worked really hard on that. So, okay. Oh, and I forgot to do her eye. So I really don't want a lot of water on my brush for this part, because I just want it a little bit wet. I don't want it to bleed all over the place. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. That was very subtle, so if you have a tiny painting like I do, then use a tiny brush and be careful with your details. You don't want to go overboard. In this case, if I have too much of the brown right there, because there's so much black around it, I can fix it later on by going back in with the black and just touching it up, and it'll cover right up over that brown if I need to do that. And then I guess a lot of painting and artwork is being patient and waiting. I'm not super patient, but I'm going to wait for this to dry because I don't want to mess it up. And then maybe my rabbit will also take another nap so you can hear what's going on. Okay, so I was going to do something with the background area that I haven't filled in yet. And I think I like this sort of olivey color that's in the background here. So I think I'm just going to use that in all of this leftover area and not worry about the details of the chair and the drawers and whatever else is in the background of this photo. We'll focus more on the dog here. So I don't really have a watercolor pencil that is that olive color. So what I'm going to do is use this sort of spring green here. And again, I'm going to leave some space around the shape and the outline of the dog. I'll move her photo for a second. And then just fill this in. I'm not using a whole lot of color, just a little bit. And to make the olive, I'm going to add a little bit of brown to it. So I have the tan already, and I'll add a little bit of that. And then I have a darker brown too that I can add. I'm not sure if that's going to be dark enough with that tan, so I'll use the darker brown too. And I'm just coloring again. And is that going to be green enough now, I wonder? Maybe not. So I have a darker green as well. I do have lots of colors, I just don't have exactly what I needed. So I'll put in a little bit of this darker green. I don't want to add too much of it because it's kind of got more blue to it. And that olive color is definitely more yellowy. So I guess if I have some concerns about how that turns out, I can add a little bit of the yellow too. We've got quite a mixture going on here. But this is how you mix colors when they're dry with the watercolor pencils on the paper. So let's see how that goes. I'll get a little water on my brush here. And see if I like this color. It is a little bit lighter than I thought it would be. But not awful. And lighter is okay because we can always make it darker. If it were too dark, then we would be stuck probably, unless you have a lighter acrylic paint that you want to go over with it with. And maybe I will decide that I like the lighter background too. That's always a possibility. Okay, we'll let that dry and then I will decide if I want to make it darker or not. Okay, I am going to darken up this background a little bit. I'm going to take my dark brown watercolor pencil and just color a little bit more over this. Ooh, it's very dark. I have concerns. Okay, and I'll add a little water and see if I blend that in how that looks. Maybe too brown now, huh? This side is looking, right over here, is looking pretty good. This part in the middle, I need more green. So I'm going to paint on the brush here, a little off to the side of my actual painting, and hopefully we won't get too much spraying onto it. It's not super blended. Okay, and then maybe I'll draw a little bit with it and try and get some more green in there. Such a helpful bun. I'll probably get it back to what the color that it was before. I'm just adding a little bit more water here to blend it in. It's kind of intense right now. Okay, and then we'll blot it to tone that down a little bit. And be careful with your blotter so that you don't get colors in places where you don't want them. Okay. So I think I'll just leave that part alone for now, and we'll go back over and do some of the darker areas. So you might want to study your reference photo to see where your dark areas are. So I'm going to be using more of the black. And right here is super dark. Be right in here, right next to her face, here on her shoulder. I do want to leave this light spot. The exterior part of her ear is a lot darker than this interior part, so I'll do some of that. Her face has a lot of different light areas, so it looks like the darkest one is maybe this one little part over her eye, right above her eyebrow. This side of her face is darker. The light must be coming from that direction. So I'm just going to try and follow those areas, and your photo will probably be different, so you'll want to take a good look at it before you decide where to put in the dark areas. So I'm going to paint, pulling some color off of my watercolor pencil like this with my paintbrush. And then try and remember where I said those dark areas were. Their ear. And this is a little too wet, so take off some of that water, quickly blot before it decides to run into my background here. See, we can control it. And since that was really wet, I'm just going to take some of that off and see if I can draw with it a little bit. Yeah, that's working a little better. My brush is a little bit drier now, so maybe we'll have better luck with this. It looks like there's a darker area right over here. There's a darker area right on top of her nose. This lighter area is not as big as I had painted it, so I'm going to encroach on it a little bit here. This area is pretty dark. I'll do her back too, because that's definitely see that that is darker. Training your eye to see all those differences is a challenge sometimes. Okay. I'm just going to leave that a little bit lighter there. I like the way that that looks. Okay, and she's got like a light area right up here, right above that very defined spot. So I'm going to try and preserve that. I am painting in little strokes to kind of indicate where, like how her hair is laying, so hopefully she's looking a little fluffy. Fluffy dog. And there's that lighter area just in there where she's got some light hairs. They're not as defined as this area down there. And then it's dark right here. Not as dark right here. Dark sort of in here. And you can see how the color builds up. So you've got these different areas, different shades of black and gray that are showing where the light falls on Sloane's coat, making her look a little bit more three-dimensional, a bit more realistic. Okay, we'll do this ear. That's very dark up there. And right across in here is pretty dark too. She's got a little bit of shine here. And sort of, you can see kind of, maybe you can't, can see that like right above her eyebrows, I've kind of drawn these extra eyebrows, but it looked like there were, in the picture, like there were round areas above them, but more black. So I'm going to add to her eyebrows here. And again, it's very dark over on this side of her face. This area was pretty dark. And the tip and outside of her ear here need a little bit more paint. And there's some black coming in here, so I'll give a little bit of detail in that area. And over in here, there's just so much to paint, Sloan. Okay. And right around her eyes, really dark, like that. And we get her pupil too. Okay, I have some work to do on blending this a little bit and getting some darker areas where I had, especially on the inside of this ear here. So I'm gonna pull some of the color down that I put on the outside and see if that helps a little bit with the blending. And the same thing over here. Rabbits. This is still pretty light up here. And those are a little bit bigger than I wanted. Okay, here's her other eye. So that was really hard to see in the photo. So I want it to be there, but kind of subtle. I'm just getting some of the extra paint off of here. I think it's gonna be a little bit too much still. This is a little bit darker down here. Darker under here. That's another way you can add some of the shadow, is by bringing some gray into this areas where you have a shadow cast by your subject. Okay, so this is pretty dry now. I might be able to give her more of an eye. Although this is part of her ear, it looks a little bit bigger than I want it to be. So I might try and edit that a little bit. I don't know how successful it is. I'm gonna get this wet over here and kind of push that black gray away. And that looked like it worked pretty well. So if you've got anything that you want to clean up, you can add a little water and try and push that darker color away from where you want it to be. Okay. Let's see. What have I forgotten? Maybe right around here I need some outline. And in here. Where else? Okay, looking pretty good. Okay, so these areas down here could be a little bit darker. So maybe I will add some black to those. Let's see how that turns out. It's a little bit of a wash. And I need another napkin for blotting. That comes out. I lost all my definition too. Okay. So I'll add a little bit back. And maybe with a darker brown over here. And then just a little bit of water to help on that end. Now this area looks pretty light to me, and it does have some of that floor wood grain up here. So I'll just add some of that in. And we'll do a little bit over here too. Okay. Just a little bit of extra blending. I'm going to move the coloring around here a little bit. Her eye looked uneven to me, so it's kind of down over here, and I'm moving it a little bit up this way. Since it's so dark, it was hard to tell anyway. And I still have that tiny, tiny bit of that beige left over, so I'll see if I can add it right there, kind of lighten up that area. And then blot it a little bit. Okay, so I've officially moved Sloane's eye. And this area, which was kind of wet before, is drier now, so I can add some more green to it. And my background is kind of ambiguous here, so Sloane could actually be outside. We don't know that she's on a wooden floor for sure. I may have just transported her into the forest or a park. And get that wet enough to blend it in. And at some point you will want to stop and say, that's enough. I have worked this well enough. So this is what I ended up with. This is my reference photo. They're a little different, but I've got the general, the idea of Sloane here, if not the picture perfect version. Thanks for joining me. I hope you had fun making pet portraits with me today. Sloane had lots of fun. For more great ideas and other crafts you can try, you can check out our website, www.huntleylibrary.org. See you next time.